Um, I'm Colleen Jose. I lead community and our efforts in editorial. I know many of you traveled really far from Germany, Japan, the UK, so thank you all for being here and for being part of our vibrant community. I'm really excited to introduce my colleague, Leonard Rosenthol. Leonard is Senior Principal Scientist at Adobe. He serves as PDF Architect and has been involved with the technology for over 30 years. In 2019, shortly after the CAI was established, he took on the responsibility of Chief Architect for the CAI, and this led him to chairing the technical working group of the C2PA. So over to Leonard to tell you more.
Great, thank you, Colleen. Yeah, I don't know what it is that all of those pictures are missing our top of our heads, so we'll have to figure that out. There's a hardware problem, so it's not my fault. All right, there we go, much better. All right, so you've heard a lot already this morning. I will try not to duplicate a lot of the material, but I would like to spend some time, put it in context, and go a little deeper into the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, the C2PA. So you've heard about the C2PA a bit. You see CAI all over the place. So what's the relationship between the two, other than content authenticity came first and C2PA came second? At the C2PA, we like to think of ourselves as the architects, in that we are the ones out there putting together the technical standards, defining how this stuff is going to work. And then CAI is the group that is out there building implementations, doing the education, doing the outreach to various organizations, and leveraging the work that we do at the C2PA. So obviously we are working very, very closely together, but we each have very clear delineated focuses. There we are. So as I mentioned, the C2PA operates as a separate organization. We are operated as what's called a Linux Foundation Development Foundation project. This is the way that a lot of open standards now are done. Various image formats, Wi-Fi standards, digital certificates, all sorts of things are now done through the Linux Foundation because it's a nice infrastructure for doing open standards and open source today. And as I mentioned, our goal, our mission at the C2PA is to define that standard for content provenance and authenticity at scale with a focus on, and we think about and have established very early on, the use cases that enable, whether it's a publisher, it's a creative, it's a user. We also think about not only those individuals, but also organizations. We've had various people come to us over time from different organizations, insurance, banking, and others, who are also thinking about how they can put this same idea of content provenance and authenticity to use. So our membership is nowhere near the 2,000 that the CAI has, and that's actually okay. We are over 80 members at this point, and we are getting membership applications in daily. So the picture here is a little out of date because it takes us a little bit to get all of the logos updated on our website. But as I said, here you can see hardware vendors, software vendors, network providers, human rights organizations, certificate vendors, all sorts of agencies, organizations, companies with different reasons for joining and wanting to be part of building this standard. And we also don't do it alone. We have established liaisons with various other open standards organizations. We partner with the ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, and a number of their groups. We partner with the IPTC, the group that's responsible for metadata for photographs and video. We partner with ETSI. ETSI is the European Telecommunication Standards Institute. They're the ones that define the rules and standards in the European Union for digital identity and digital signatures. And even specific groups like the PDF Association who work with us to ensure that our standards can be leveraged with other standards such as PDF. and we continue to build up these liaisonships. We continue to build up our relationships with other groups, the W3C, we don't have a formal relationship with, but we work with very closely as well on web standards. So our goal is all about building this open standard and integrating it with those standards from these other organizations around the world. You've heard a bunch of this already today from Dana, Nico, and others, but there are 3 pillars that we focus on. Obviously, the clear one is provenance. It's in our name. But we also, education, you've heard about that. Dana spoke well on that matter. And also about policy, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing in policy through the C2PA. The one thing we do not do, will not do, is detection. We believe very clearly that it is about attribution, it is about provenance, it is not about detection. Why? Because provenance is not an arms race. We don't want to get into a battle of, hey, we can detect your stuff. Okay, maybe not anymore. You know, it's not like the days of copy protection back in the 80s and 90s. We just don't want to be there. We want to focus on putting the information that is known into the assets today and having them carried into the future. That's our goal. Also, you know, I work for a company, Adobe, which makes software that does editing of content. We'd like to continue to sell Photoshop and Acrobat and Premiere and everything to edit all of that content. We've done well so far in our 40 years of existence. We'd like to continue to do so. So editing is good. And you've seen lots of great examples today, and we'll continue to see more of why it needs to be this full workflow and continue through it. I'll also talk a bit about signals. Each one of these pieces of information that goes into our content credentials, we talk about as trust signals, because every one of those things, the who, the what, the how, the when, the why, potentially, are all things that that end user, that consumer of your content, can look at and then make their own determination about, do they trust, do they believe in this content? Because we can't do that for them. Machines cannot do that for them. Only individuals, as they are consuming the content, can make that decision. And so the more trust signals that they get, the more that they will be able to make those decisions intelligently for themselves. When we started this process back in 2021, as you heard, we established some design goals that we have kept ourselves to throughout the development process. And I'm just going to mention a few of them because they really are key to what we do and why we do it. So the first one was, our goal was not to develop anything new. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. Instead, we want to build on battle-tested technologies, things that have been out in the field before, other open standards. So we've done that. All of the stuff that you will hear a little bit about now, and then I have a breakout this afternoon, and I'm happy to talk in great detail about this. They're pre-existing standards. We just took them and put them together into a new and unique way of leveraging them. We really didn't have to invent a lot of new stuff, and that's great. Made it a lot easier for people like Leica and others to implement because of that. Very early on, we decided that cloud storage, use of blockchains, distributed ledgers was not a requirement. We are perfectly happy to have it used. We have many members who do this, whether it's in clouds, blockchains, ledgers, et cetera, and integrate with our content credentials, but it is not a requirement. It needed to work completely offline, like for example on a camera, as well as in a fully connected space, and we've achieved that. We talked about this idea of audit trails, of provenance, all the way from that capture experience to the final publication. And it had to work across all types of formats and all types of media. Images, videos, audio, documents, 3D, AR and VR. All of the things, any way in which you can create content, you needed to be able to establish its provenance. And we've been working very, very hard within ourselves and with our partner organizations to make that a reality. As you heard Dana mention, we are currently at version 1.4 of our specification. It was just released a few weeks ago, so I understand it hasn't made its all the way, has not made that information up to the executive floors where Dana works. So totally understandable. 1.4 is new. A lot of interesting things in 1.4. This was an opportunity where we had some new members come in. We get, every so often this happens. We had some new members join who brought some ideas with them of things they wanted to see. So a lot of the stuff that came out in 1.4 came from new members. My favorite example of this is company Monotype. Some of you may know they're a long-standing font vendor. They brought us the idea of establishing provenance for fonts. So one of the interesting features in 1.4 includes the ability to establish provenance for fonts and text. We did a lot of work around text and documents as well in 1.4. So that was an idea that came from new membership, and that's what we like to see is our new members bringing us their needs, their use cases, and us figuring out how to apply the technology that we've built to their needs. So what is this thing? Very simply, our goal is to establish cryptographically verifiable and tamper-evident information. Okay? And we do that around an established trust model. That trust model is sacrosanct in our standard. Like if there was one core kernel of the work we've done, it's that trust model. That's the one thing that we will not change. It is what everything is based around. It's how we as an organization and users, as they start to consume these things, are going to know that they can trust the C2PA and how they're going to then establish the trust about the content they consume. So there's a couple of core components in our credential. So this is a pretty little diagram here of what a content credential, the parts are. Internally in the technical spec, we refer to this as a C2PA manifest. That's the technical term. Content credentials are C2PA manifests. They are a one-to-one map and designed to be that way. It's just the human term, and we like it. And of course, the pins look really pretty too. So a nod to Pia Blumenthal, who was our designer for both C2PA and CAI, who did a wonderful job on the logo. So what do we have in here? What we have is really the three bottom components are the most important ones. Assertions are the statements of fact. These are the things you're going to put in there, the who, the what, how, etc. These are your statements. As you saw from Leica, these could be the GPS coordinates. They could be the copyright. They could be any sort of information that you want to establish as fact about your content. That's an assertion. The assertions are gathered together and bundled into what we call a claim. And the claim is then digitally signed, and that's the claim signature. In addition, as you saw, Dana showed you, if you wanted to, you could turn on your identity. You could have your name and information established in there as well. That goes into what we call our VC store, so we can establish identity as well. Again, all of this bundled together, digitally signed, and becomes tamper evident. And then those pieces of information go very nicely and be displayed places like contentcredentials.org, our Verify site, as well as natively built into applications. And you can see how they just map one-to-one from each of those pieces to something in the user experience. I mentioned the manifests can be embedded. As I mentioned, images, video formats, document formats. We recently added support for Microsoft Office files in the 1.4 specification. I mentioned fonts, audio. So all about being able to embed it, carry it along with it. I also said that it can be referenced, meaning it can be stored up in the cloud, it can be stored on a blockchain or DLT. That's fine. We want to enable that in those scenarios where you either can't or don't wish to embed it, you can store it up in the cloud, or both in some cases. You may want to keep a record, for example, in addition to it being in the asset in case it gets lost or either purposefully or unintentionally stripped from the asset. And to that point, one of the things that we are working on as we continue to advance the standard, and Andy sort of hinted at this earlier, is two other pillars of this three-pillared stool we talk about. So in addition to provenance, we want to look at watermarking. So we have an active group right now within the C2PA focused on watermarking. So how can we leverage watermarking as a technology to connect to our manifest and manifest data? And also fingerprinting, so we can also go back and again, reattach manifests when they become detached and lost from assets. You've seen some other pictures similar to this today, but this whole idea of, again, the process goes from creation, editing, publishing, sharing, and viewing. Each time another manifest, another content credential is added telling the full story of what happened to this asset and by whom. So I mentioned that the trust model is key to what we do. Let me spend a minute or two on this. Our trust model isn't something we created from whole cloth. It's the exact same trust model that has been around for over 30 years now. It is based on X509 certificates. It's the same technology that represents that lock icon in your browser, at least until that icon goes away. But that lock icon, we know, we understand it, same trust model. It's also the same trust model that has existed in PDF for over 25 years. So when you sign your documents electronically, you're using that exact same technology. It is standardized by the ISO. It is standardized by IETF, by other organizations, so well established. So we've built our trust model on that exact same foundation. Certificate authorities and trust lists, and this is how we can establish the tamper evidentness as well as the trustworthiness of the tools, the people, the organizations that are signing that asset. Well established, we understand it, we know how it works. And I mentioned before, you combine that with trust signals. So all of those assertions, all of the information, the claim, coming together to give that user more and more useful information with which they can make their final determination about whether or not to trust this. And as I mentioned, trust is a human decision. It's not a decision by machine. And I love this picture because it really says trust is not a 1 or a 0. It's not a binary decision. It's not a thumbs up or thumbs down. It really goes up and down a scale. And as you look at each one of the things about an image, you're mentally doing this, not consciously, but subconsciously going, okay, I trust it a little more, I trust it a little less. And so this idea of this sliding scale of trust and having it on a range just speaks to me, and I really speaks to what we do at C2PA and how we think about our manifests and credentials. So I want to talk, as you've heard, one of the things that has come up most recently at the C2PA in the world is generative AI. When we started this effort, it wasn't a thing, but as it became one, we made it a high priority. It was the highest priority in our 1.2 specification, was introducing aspects around generative AI. And we introduced 3 of them. So there's 3 things that we wanted to ensure could be done with a content credential in this area. First and foremost was you needed to identify that a given asset was or was not involved with generative AI. This could have been created from scratch. You saw Dana's Adobe Firefly image. This could have been something where you started with a photograph and you added or removed someone or changed something, for example, using Photoshop's generative fill. Anything in which generative AI or AI, not just generative, but it can be applied, we want that identified onto the asset. We also want to be able to identify the regions of interest where that was applied. And this is not just about images or videos, but we just thought about it in the latest 1.4 specification. We introduced this for text and LLMs as well. So if you're authoring a document, say in Microsoft Word using the new Copilot feature, and you highlight a paragraph and you say, you know what, simplify this paragraph for me, okay? It goes and it does that, and then you say save as PDF, and you open that PDF, you should be able to see in your PDF viewer, hey, this one paragraph was impacted by AI. Because if that's one paragraph out of 300 pages, don't tell me the document was impacted by generative AI. Tell me what part of that document was impacted by generative AI. And that applies, again, this is the document case, but apply that, again, to videos. If you have an hour-long video and only 3 frames were impacted, we need to know just those frames. And so this is where regions of interest, another feature of Content Credentials, comes into play. We also wanted to establish the ability to record what we call the recipe. So we have a very kitchen-oriented vocabulary in C2PA. We have ingredients. So when you bring a bunch of other images or videos or components together into a composited asset, we call those things ingredients. So how did you do that? How did you build up an asset? We call that the recipe. So the recipe in a generative AI scenario, that's the prompt you use. If you provided a sample image, like do it in this style, you should be able to provide that image. If you use seed values or any sort of other thing that helped your generative AI produce the result, that's the recipe. And we'd love that recipe information to be carried along with the asset as well. Very important in the creation process. We also went the other side, which is that it was very clear, and if you've read any stories in the press, you know this to be the case, that creatives, authors wanted to be able to say, do not train on my assets. And so we established another one of those assertions, which enables people to say, do not train on my asset. And you can identify different types of training that can be done. You can also say, do not use it for inference. So if you don't want to allow it to be used as a sample for styling, you can do that as well. So briefly, since I'm getting the nod over on the side, because the clock isn't working, it's not my fault. I'll briefly talk about the fact that you've heard about, Dana mentioned the US and the work going on here in the United States on policy. We're not just focused on the United States. The UK and EU are places that we are focused on. I've been in contact with the Chinese government around their AI legislation. I've been invited to come to Australia to talk to them about it as well. So we are talking to various governments around the world on this issue. It is extremely important, and we believe that the C2PA technology, the content credentials, are what are going to help address the problems and help them establish those legislative restrictions. So I will wrap up. Again, so the C2PA, our content credentials are about establishing that open standard. It's not about establishing one single way of doing it. It's not about establishing a platform or set of source code or anything like that. It's an open standard that you build upon that creates interoperability, compatibility, so that no matter what tool is used, what asset type is used, you can interchange and understand and express the provenance that you wish. So thank you all very much, and if you have any other questions about it, I'll be around today.